What are the worst three words in the English language?
Oh, that's easy. Rail replacement bus.
Oh, you got my gag. Rail replacement service.
Oh, yeah. So there was one. The whole new era of nationalisation began today with a service that was partially a bus.
That's kind of sad, isn't it?
But, it is the other one worked in the other direction from Waterloo to Shepperton, and we had people aboard it.
Oh, well, that's very good. Henry's with us in real life today. Henry, what are we talking about?
We are talking about the newly nationalised, is it South Western Railway or South Western Replacement Service, as it was this morning?
Just one of the many news stories in this Sunday's episode of Newscast.
Hello, it's Paddy in the studio.
And it's Laura having a sip of tea.
And it's Henry in the studio.
Yes. What do we owe that to?
Because it's been so long that I thought I must come and dissect the news with you in person.
Well, it's great.
It's very nice to have you with us for reals. So there was lots of news this morning. Our main guest today was Angela Rayner, the deputy leader of the Labour Party. And Henry, just remind people, if they've been living under a rock, why there's lots of focus on her at the moment.
Well, there was an excellent story in the Telegraph early this week, which revealed a memo that she or her department or her team, it's a bit unclear, had submitted to the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, actually some time ago, in advance of the spring statement in March, proposing a range of ways in which Rachel Reeves could raise taxes at that spring statement. And I keep stressing that it was prior to the spring statement because that therefore means this isn't some live debate in government. It's a debate which Rachel Reeves won. Mm-hmm. And that means that the Chancellor ignored the Deputy Prime Minister. That means that there is this private, but now public, open sore almost between the Chancellor and the Deputy Prime Minister on what the government's economic policy should be. And I think that speaks to the biggest debate running through the Labour Party at the moment.
And it also means that somebody sat on that document until there was a moment where it might be useful to them. At least they perceived it would be useful for them to put it into the public domain.
Yes, and one of the papers said it was written to be leaked. That when you look at the style of it, it's about important positions by an important person. Ooh, it's coming to the public domain.
Well, this is what she said this morning when I asked if she had leaked it and whether anybody she knew or had any connection to could have leaked it or how it all transpired.
I'm not going to comment on a leaked memo, but what I will say is that me, the Chancellor, the Prime Minister and all other Cabinet members, we discuss these things. It's not rocket science that a government, when you're faced with a £22 billion black hole and some of the difficult decisions that we've had to make to secure our economy, we do have those discussions. But I'm also 100% behind the Chancellor and the Prime Minister in taking forward our programme for government, which has already seen 1 million people get a pay rise through the changes we've made to the low pay. We've already seen that we're on track with housing. We're putting more money into housing than we've done before. The NHS is getting that investment. So we are already have our programme for change, which is delivering for working people. But we know we've got to go further.
And you've made that point clearly. But this memo does matter, because it appears to reveal that there are quite significant differences of opinion at the very top of government.
Let me be clear. There is not a significant different opinion across government. The government has discussions. We do that. We do that in private. So I'm not going to comment on any memos or documents that have been circulated. But I can tell you that the government is absolutely 100% behind our Chancellor. And as a cabinet, we make the collective decisions.
But can you say today, on the record to our viewers, that that memo was not leaked by you or anyone connected to you?
I do not leak. I think leaks are very damaging. I'm 100% behind our cabinet and the decisions that we make collectively.
She did also say she didn't leak. She said she condemned anybody who leaked. And she also went on, Henry, quite interestingly, I thought, to say categorically that she would not run to be the Labour leader. I don't mean because she's about to any moment now, but a lot of people see these kinds of going on through the lens of her ultimate ambition.
I mean, I think the thing to say on the leak is that, and you'll have experienced this too, Laura, is that sometimes you have a story and you see public commentary or journalistic commentary on who the source of that story was, and you're sitting there thinking, wow, they are so offbeat. Yeah. So I don't think anyone should ever assume the origin of a leak. But what I can tell you is that everyone I speak to in government has decided to believe that Angela Rayner, or people supportive of Angela Rayner, leaked that memo to the Telegraph. And that tells you something about how incensed people are at the top of government about this Telegraph story, which has dominated Westminster all week, and also tells you something, I think, about how, sure, relations between Keir Starmer and his supporters and Angela Rayner and her supporters have got a lot better than their nadir 4 years ago, but there still isn't a completely high-trust environment there. I think Angela Rayner was trying to patch that up by saying that she never wanted to run for leader. I mean, she kind of had to say that. We all remember Michael Gove saying that, and then he ran for leader twice, albeit unsuccessfully. So, she did have to say that, and, let's see where we are as and when there is a vacancy.
I think the interesting thing about this is also this government so early into its term with an absolutely whopping majority. It is quite something that they are at this stage where these conversations are even live, right? And I'm not suggesting at all that Keir Starmer is suddenly going to be on the way out. Nothing like that, I think, is realistic anytime soon. But it is worth noting that things look scrappy in a way that you wouldn't expect in a government that should still, by history, be in its pomp and sort of sweeping all before them.
Because there's two words. You've used one, you've used another, which interests me. You said discussions, you said conversations. And actually, the papers today also say that Ed Miliband stormed out of a meeting with the Treasury Minister. So in other words, I think that we as sort of general viewers and general journalists like me, the word discussion could mean stand-up row, couldn't it?
Yeah, and remember yesterday we were talking about the spending review discussions, and I wrote about that on the website yesterday, and I was told that there were a couple of ministers who had slammed doors after their meetings.
Is that a conversation or a discussion if you slam a door?
I think that's the end of a conversation, isn't it? Or it's a verdict on a conversation. There was that cabinet minister we talked about who I was told who just said no to every single thing that was raised in the Treasury meeting. And things, in the words of another government source, are getting quite spicy between ministers who haven't yet settled their budgets with the Treasury. I'm told more than half of them have settled their budgets. And there were a few kind of rumblings that they're a bit kind of like teachers' pets who've gone and got it all signed off already with the Treasury. But that's the context of all of this, is that money's massively tight. Not everyone in government is very happy with the overall kind of vision that the government's laid out, or lack thereof. And therefore, they're not that willing necessarily just to go along with things.
I guess it's the question of where does creative tension end and a government split begin?
Yes.
And the other thing that you can't stress enough, and Ed Miliband, who you mentioned, Paddy, is an exception to this, is that almost all of these people have never been in government before. So they've never done a comprehensive spending review before. They've never participated in one before. They all used to be friends who sat on, the same corridor, and if they had a dispute, they'd wander down and talk to each other. And now they have departments sending out memos saying the minister refuses X, or, the minister is willing to concede Y in exchange for Z. So I do think what we're also seeing is the sort of teething problems of a government learning to be a government. But a government doesn't usually learn to be a government in an environment where its polling has completely collapsed.
I'm holding up to the microphone, the newscasters listening, the Observer's front page. And for viewers who are watching us, you won't need me to say, it says Starmer to scrap child benefit cap. This is hot on the heels of the U-turn on winter fuel. So does it look like, is this a weekend of maximum briefings, do you think, by the different tribes?
Yes, it's a great story by Rachel Sylvester, the Observer's new political editor. I mean, the story itself is slightly softer than Starmer to scrap child benefit cap. It's kind of more Starmer wants to scrap child benefit cap. But even that, by the way, is quite striking. And there was another excellent story by Alva Ray in Bloomberg a few days ago, suggesting that Starmer's chief advisor, his chief of staff, Morgan McSweeney, disagrees with the idea of scrapping the two-child benefit cap. Just briefly, we should probably remind people what the two-child benefit cap is. So it prevents parents from claiming certain benefits, principally
and tax credits.
And tax credits.
It's tax credits, so it's confusing actually because it makes it sound like it's about child benefit. Actually, it has become known as the child benefit cap. Actually, it stops families with more than two children from claiming certain tax credits. So there we are, public service announcement done.
Yeah, no, but it's really important because there's a political fault line about it as well, which is that some of our newscasters will be parents who chose not to have more children because they couldn't afford them. And that plays into a very good political argument which we've had in Britain for all of the 20th century and the 21st, which is where does individual responsibility end and the state's responsibility begin? So there is a great discussion, philosophical, to be had, and people could disagree on philosophical grounds.
Exactly. So if you listen to Gordon Brown, the former Prime Minister, what he would say is that it is cruel to restrict support available to some children from other children if they both really need it. And it goes that, you know, children didn't decide how many children there were going to be in their family, and they shouldn't be penalised because they're part of a smaller family than another child perhaps living next door who's part of a family where there are only 2 children. However, what's interesting about this is it costs loads of money. I think it's about £3.5 billion. Poverty campaigners would tell you would be the biggest thing that you could do to change the fortunes of kids who live in poverty, getting rid of this cap. However, it's an issue of massive concern inside the Labour Party. Polling doesn't always bear out that it is something that the public at large would put at the top of their list.
More than that, it is a popular policy, the two-child benefit cap. I've just got the stats up here. This is a recent YouGov poll. Among all Britons, 60% say it should be kept in place. Just 28% say it should be abolished. Among those who voted for the Labour Party in 2024, 50% say it should be kept, and just 38% say it should be abolished. Among 2024 Reform UK voters, and this is important because we learned today that Nigel Farage is going to come out for the abolition of the two-child cap, 84% say it should be kept and just 9% say it should be abolished. This is a popular policy. It is a reminder that what motivates party activists including party MPs, isn't necessarily what motivates the public. And that, by the way, not everything, no one's saying that everything a government does should be motivated by popularity, but you can see why there are strategists, among them we're told by Bloomberg, Morgan McSweeney, who are saying, well, hang on, why is this our priority given it would be putting the government on the wrong side of the public, at least according to that polling?
And the mechanics of this, just to explain to people, and the reason it's all in the news at the moment, is that the child poverty strategy, to use another mouthful of pearls, was meant to be coming out this spring. It's been delayed. It's a piece of work being done by the Department for Work and Pensions and the Department for Education. So it's the people who are concerned with child welfare. Those departments are reviewing how to get lots and lots of kids out of poverty. One of the things that they've been looking at is whether or not they should restore this cap. But that strategy was delayed this week until the autumn. And that's one of the reasons why this is back in the news. I wonder if we can compare our understandings of where the process is. So I spoke to somebody who's deeply involved in all of this a few days ago. They told me that it's very clear that Keir Starmer would like to do this. He would like to get rid of the cap. But it will come down to whether or not the Treasury can find the money. Now, that's sort of borne out by the Observer story this morning, which suggests that, yes, Starmer has indicated to the people involved in this discussion he'd like to do it, and he wants the Treasury to be able to find the cash. But I was told that the answer about whether or not the Treasury can find the cash has not emerged yet, and it may not emerge for some time. But I don't know if that's what, because there's a lot of chatter about this.
No, that is my understanding. And I think it's also worth just reflecting on the biggest story of the week, which is the winter fuel allowance U-turn. And I agree with your conversation yesterday. It absolutely is a U-turn. And
thank goodness it wasn't just me. It was steam coming out my ears.
No, and I was very proud to file an analysis piece for the BBC website within 20 minutes of the U-turn, whose first sentence was, the details will follow later, but this is clearly a U-turn. But on that as well, it is a U-turn, brackets, pending Treasury funding being found. And this is all a reminder that actually sitting underneath all of this, again, is a dispute over how this Labour government should approach the economy. Because there are those who say, well, a Treasury which under its self-imposed borrowing rules and tax constraints, if that Treasury cannot find the money for abolishing the two-child benefit cap and for extending the winter fuel allowance to more pensioners, then that is a Treasury whose approach to borrowing and tax is wrong. And
then what's it doing calling itself a Labour Treasury anyway?
Because it is about the heart and soul of Labour, isn't it? It's about this question of what you do with poor children. And this now puts a number on the tens of thousands of British children who could be lifted from relative poverty. Well, that's an issue on which Labour in opposition would fight. So you then get Labour in government, and they're obviously fighting each other.
And you spoke to Rachel Maskell, who is one of the MPs often at the forefront of campaigning on poverty. She was very important in the debate about winter fuel, which did, in the end, lead the leadership to ditch its proposals to be replaced with what? Still, we know not what. But you spoke to her this morning.
Yes, so here's what she said about the Observer story.
It's the right thing to do, not only a 2-child benefit cap, but we mustn't then see a 3-child benefit cap. We know that we inherited 4.3 million children in poverty, 4.5 million today, but we must protect children above all. But it's not just the child benefit cap. We need to make sure that complete benefit cap, which impacts on 122,000 households, is also scrapped, because 71% of children are living in those households too.
Right, but your general message to the government is enough welfare cuts, is it?
Well, that's not why people elect a Labour government. The Labour Party has a
what's your
special
message?
reason for that. But
is your message enough welfare cuts? Just we haven't got much time.
Absolutely. We do not need to cut for children, for older people, or indeed for disabled people.
OK. Nigel Farage is in the Sunday Telegraph saying he will reinstate the full winter fuel payment, and he says he'll pay for that by removing hotels for migrants. Do you agree with Nigel Farage? Reinstate the full winter fuel payment, however it's funded?
Well, there are people, obviously, who don't need it.
So no, you don't then?
So I think we can have a look at how it can be applied, but it's very difficult to do that without a universal approach. And universalism has got its benefits too.
Really interesting, because we then went on to ask Kemi Badenoch about what the Conservatives would do. And she said, well, we would never have scrapped it. And it was a mistake and Labour have made a terrible hash of it. But she did then go on to say, but I think millionaires shouldn't get it. So she was trying to do what can be quite difficult in politics, which is actually express a sort of nuanced position. So she kept saying, right now, we don't agree with it. We should restore it. But actually, on a point of principle, I don't think that the very wealthiest should get it.
There are ways to get it back without taking it away.
You put it into tax.
Into tax on your tax return. Then if you're a better off person who happens to be a pensioner in receipt of it, it comes off at the other end. So there are all sorts of ways it can be tackled in government. But it's really complicated when you think they've had to do all of this, and they announced this before they announced their budget. They came in July. This was one of the first things we spoke. It seems to be all we've been speaking about, really, and it's only 1.5 billion in savings.
Yeah, and you've got to wonder whether or not, and as we've talked about it before, and I think we'll carry on talking about it probably forever. I think it will go down as the first big mistake in many people's views of this government that swept into power with an incredibly big majority and then did something in that moment that we were recalling yesterday in the context where they were terribly worried about the economy. But looking back now, there are many people inside government as well as out who will look at it and think, my God, I wish we'd never started all this.
Clearly, I mean, the U-turn was an admission that it was a mistake that caused, I was about to say incalculable damage, but actually it's calculable. We saw it in the local election results.
Yeah.
It was blamed by so many Labour MPs and ultimately, I think, senior Labour ministers for the local election results being bad and losing the Runcorn and Helsby by-election to Reform on the same day. You mentioned Kemi Badenoch, Laura. I think we should also just briefly pass comment, because I think this has been another of the big stories of what's ultimately been a newsy week. There was a poll at the start of the week, may well have been an outlier, but nevertheless, it was damaging to the morale of an already damaged Conservative Party, which had them in 4th place behind the Liberal Democrats. Mm-hmm. The mood of despondency among Conservative MPs, I think, cannot be overstated. We were talking about the 2-child benefit cap, and Kemi Badenoch now finds herself, I think, in a position of basically being the only party leader, I'm not actually sure where the Lib Dems are, but certainly the only one of Labour Reform and the Conservatives who supports the 2-child benefit cap. Now, some might think there's an opportunity there, given the polling I read out about it being a popular policy, especially among people on the right. But if I asked Conservative MPs, I haven't yet, but I know that if I asked Conservative MPs whether they thought that Kemi Badenoch could capitalise on that opportunity, they would laugh. I mean, there really is, I think, a mood that is moving quite fast in the Conservative Party, whereas previously it was give her a few sets of local elections, let her get through. There are people now saying, actually, the Conservative Party might not survive another set of local elections at this rate. And I do think we should just tell newscasters that mood does seem to be moving quite fast.
And you can see that in some of the reporting. There was a story yesterday about Conservative Party chairs discussing her future. We know there have been conversations among donors about what to do. And her dilemma or her problem has been, she took over, she said, this is going to take a long time. she might not have time because politics moves at 100 miles an hour. And yes, she's only been in charge for about 6 months or something, but 6 months in politics, I mean, if a week's a long time in politics, I mean, 6 months is a century. And her colleague, Robert Jenrick, who is not a stranger to saying things that make him appear to be slightly less than 100% behind her, but he said very clearly, we have to get moving this week. She said again to us this morning, I don't know how long it'll take, but it is going to take quite a long time to sort ourselves out.
I can't say how long it will take. I have been told that it takes about 2 years for people to move on from a government that has just lost. But I need to use this time as wisely as possible. And that means rebuilding my party, but also making sure that we hold the government to account.
The mood does seem to be turning and patience does seem to be running out. And it seems to me as well, just in the way that Westminster debates are running and the way that the news is working at the moment, I think that they are sort of engaged, not just in a battle to regain some kind of support and popularity, but actually a battle for relevance.
Totally, which is an extraordinary thing to say about the Conservative Party.
The most successful political party in this country in
history.
history.
Though they have the fewest MPs they've ever had, 120 is still far more than 5, which is what Reform UK now have. I mean, I think in a funny way, Kemi Badenoch is the greatest political victim of Keir Starmer's unpopularity, because the government's popularity has declined too fast for a Conservative Party who, by their own admission, know that the public needs to wait a while before they are going to begin listening to them again. But into that unpopularity vacuum has come Reform UK, because people don't want to hear from the Conservatives at the moment. And that's why some people want within the Conservative Party, want Kemi Badenoch to speed up her process.
And I'm going to steal, for the first time publicly, steal our 18-year-old newscaster's version of this.
You're terrible to steal from almost children.
I'm going to steal it because it's basically saying they haven't got a track record. Reform has no record on which to be judged. You can have a philosophical argument about you don't like them or you do like them, but the Tories have run the country since 2010. A lot of the arguments are on them. And then you've got Labour coming in, making a few self-imposed mistakes by their own. If a U-turn is an admission of a self-imposed mistake. So voters can say, oh, I'll just try these people who don't look like the Conservatives and they don't look like Labour. So we're in a sort of post-Brexit disruptive phase of politics where, under the first-past-the-post system, anyone can win any seat in about 100 seats or more, you'll tell me. The margin of switching from a Labour MP to another one is very small.
Well, there were 80 seats at the general election where Reform was in second place to Labour, which is a statistic that worries people a lot in the government. But the other, I suppose, you're talking about the political situation that we're in 2025, which seems like this sort of cacophony of all these different parties. But when it comes to the Conservatives and Kemi Badenoch, I think there's also something that is a much more sort of conventional observation. When parties have had a terrible, 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 terrible time and the public doesn't want to listen to them, what people have done before, what leaders have done before, is come in and say something incredibly dramatic that takes people by surprise or is completely unexpected for that person in order to grab attention and to say, look, we're different, we've changed. So David Cameron went off to the Arctic. Tony Blair picked a huge fight with the unions in Clause 4, which was the kind of bastion of, the fundamental belief in collective ownership that the Labour Party held. Successful opposition leaders who managed to sort of get the conch back, if you like, and be listened to and demonstrate to the public that they're not the same as the people who went before, have done very dramatic, unexpected things to grab attention and to demonstrate that difference. We haven't seen that from Kemi Badenoch. She's saying, rightly or wrongly, we have to look, we have to think, here's a bit of new policy here on migration, here's a bit of new policy on net zero. But the kind of dramatic flourish is sometimes what has been needed, if you look at history, in order to be listened to again. And that's not something that we've seen from her.
Boris Johnson comes back.
Nothing's ever impossible. I know there are people who do talk about that. He would have to find... Someone said to me yesterday, it would come down to whether or not Kemi Badenoch would be foolish enough to ever let him stand as an MP again. Because he would have to, or whether or not anybody would give up their seat for him to come back.
It would be the seats where it's 50% plus, isn't it? If you're a Tory with a 50% plus majority, would you give it up?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there are any Conservative seats which you could say right now are by-election proof.
No.
Even with Boris Johnson as the Conservative candidate. But, I mean, Conservative Party rules say that their leader has to be an MP. It's
not the law.
My hunch would be that any scenario in which Boris Johnson is trying to come back as leader of the Conservative Party, he'd want that rule changed. He'd want to become leader from outside of Parliament. If anything, that would sort of liberate him more than responding to Keir Starmer in the House of Commons. I don't know. I mean, the fact that we're discussing this 6 months into Kemi Badenoch's leadership tells its own story. But let's not forget, in the last couple of weeks, we've had so much of British politics reckoning with the surge in legal immigration, which happened on Boris Johnson's watch. Part of Kemi Badenoch's analysis of the Conservative Party's what the Conservative Party needs to overcome is the fact that a lot of voters are furious, a lot of their natural voters are furious with what happened to immigration. So I think Boris Johnson would have to find a way to reckon with and explain to Conservative reform switchers what actually happened there and why that happened.
And while he's certainly very good at grabbing attention, we should also remember that he became an electoral liability, not an asset, in the view of many Conservative MPs who dumped him. So there we are. People in the Conservative Party who might suggest that as a possible solution are not necessarily going to find that it would be successful with a weary public.
Adam is here tomorrow from the Hay Festival.
So he's not here. He's in Shropshire or Herefordshire.
He's in the
wherever
earbuds.
It is.
He's in my earbuds.
He's in your earbuds. Excellent. Well, I'm sure that will be very lovely.
From Hay. So from here, from Newscast HQ, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.